been a regular speaker at Creativity and Madness. We're thrilled to have him back again. He is the founder and the medical director of Costco Bay Medical, a private mental health and substance abuse center. Oh, there's two of them actually, in Portland, Maine, and on Boston's North Shore. He was educated at Princeton University, received a research grant to travel to New Mexico to study Walter de Maria's lightning field. Dr. Spiegel completed his residency in psychiatry at the University of New Mexico. He has authored 2 books. The first is The Mindful Medical Student, a psychiatrist's guide to staying who you are while becoming who you want to be, and Art Healing, Visual Art for Emotional Insight and Well-Being, which was awarded the winner in the category Art for the USA Best Books 2011 Awards, which was sponsored by USA Book News. Until recently, he had a part-time psychotherapy practice in New York City and was a regular guest on The Positive Mind with Armand DeMille on New York's WBAI. More recently, he starred as an interventionalist on National Geographic Channel's special program titled Hardcore Hobbies. So please welcome Dr. Jeremy Spiegel. He will speak on the psychology of really bad art.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning. Now, in the interests of art, I would like to ask each and every one of you to do something for me, especially those of you that are sitting. Now listen, I don't want you to break your neck or anything. Okay? I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you, when I say 3, on the count of 3, I'd like you to lean gently back into your chair, and then I would like you to lean forward into your chair. And I'd like you to do that a few times until I say stop. 1, 2, 3. Stop. Thank you. Thank you. I call that Squeaky Chair Symphony, Santa Fe Convention Center 2015. Thank you. Now, someone might actually make $1 by doing something like this, okay? So let's move on to I want to tell you about bad art. No, I mean, look, why is there even art? I mean, there are these questions that still elude me. But bad art, you know, I have to, in order to sort of investigate what this is, and of course, I don't just think about art, I also think about something clinical, because I can't help it, you know, I mean, and so of course ultimately this talk is going to end with a discussion about body dysmorphia. And so what I'd like to do is, even though I'm not really going to introduce body dysmorphia until later into the talk, I'd like you to at least to plant that seed in your head, so you're going to be primed to look at what I'm telling you as I describe beauty, value, frame, and a lot of other things that go into the assessment of visual art. At least you know where we're going with all this, okay? So first, let's just talk about innate beauty. I mean, you really can't have any discussion of beauty unless you consider nature. Because where else but nature does beauty stem from? Here we have a absolutely gorgeous specimen before you, a peacock with so many of these eye spots. There's a variegation in the color of each eye spot, and you have this just delightful pattern. Nature has written this through the eons. Here you have an example. It's sort of a special type of natural selection. Sexual selection has created this. And, look how much energy has gone into the creation of beauty unconsciously by nature, merely for this peacock to get some. I mean, that's all it's about. That is all it's about. Because you have to attract the peahen, and apparently the only way to do that is to put your energy into creating this insanely decorative and garish kind of thing. This is beauty. Now, I mean, it's also another conversation that we can have right now about, well, isn't it also fascinating that it's not just the peahen that's attracted to this, but we humans find this beautiful. I mean, that's an entirely different talk. But, in nature, we have these things that occur. For example, the bowerbird in Australia. Now, the bowerbird is an architect, an interior designer, an engineer, an artist. The bowerbird has created this nest, or bower, but the nest is not merely this collection of twigs in this funny pattern. It includes all of these blue bottle caps and blue straws. And, it's not hardwired to go to McDonald's. It's hardwired to create the most spectacularly colorful object to attract a female bowerbird. Now, taking it a million steps further into the world of human beings, we have here a Titian from 1522 titled Bacchus and Ariadne. This is an allegorical painting where you have Bacchus, the god of wine, looking at Ariadne, who was recently dumped by her sailor come husband, who is sort of, you can see, sort of floating in the background, in a ship, that is. And, well, I mean, he brings his band of merry people, each of them excited. He's on a chariot with his leopards. And, well, there's a story that goes, behind this. And you have, he creates her, he basically deifies her. And he creates a constellation that you could see above her head. She becomes this constellation. This is sort of the story. Each of these characters has a kind of rich symbolic depth. I mean, just as you might pick apart a dream, you could look at each of these characters and read more and more into this one image. Titian, as you know, had truly an unprecedented use of color. I mean, nobody was doing this prior to him, and how luminous and delicious his paintings were. Well, what I like to do is think about art, compare that to what we just saw. So you have nature doing this, but of course we're part of nature, but granted this is with an intention. We have, I mean, the best I can do to compare the peacock's tail is to say, okay, well, this maybe relates to, in some funny analogous way, to a Titian. Then we have a not so fortunate animal, the peacock with irregular eye spots and there's just something not quite right here. There are not that many eye spots. They're irregular. They're deformed. This peacock isn't going to spread his genes very far. But, you know, there is an equivalent to this, and that is this. This is B. Arthur naked. B. Arthur naked is the only thing I can think of that would be a sort of the homologue to the diseased peacock. This is a recent work of art by John Curran. Now, John Curran painted this. Little did he know then that he would make $2 million at the sale of B. Arthur naked. That's $1 million for each of her pendulous boobs. All right, some of you like that. Anyway, so I put this together in a kind of analogy, as you might see on the old version of the SAT. You have the peacock is to the Titian as the diseased peacock is to B. Arthur naked. So I'm setting up a kind of value here. Now, look, the recognition of beauty is a biological phenomenon. In the human brain, there is an area called the anterior cingulate gyrus. Now that becomes activated when? It becomes activated when somebody, the owner of this brain, views something that it finds, that he or she finds beautiful. So we know this. We have proven this. So clearly, look how much space and energy is devoted to the recognition of beauty. It's very important. Now, beauty, indeed, there are different kinds. I mean, the beauty is a relative phenomenon in different cultures. For example, I bring this because this is a remarkable image of a woman with the disc in her lip. And the larger the disc in this particular culture, the greater the beauty. But yet, even though there are differences in different cultures, you do have certain principles that continue to apply. You know, there's a New Mexico researcher named Victor Johnston who in his face prints software his research determined that there are in fact universals to beauty. Because, you know, especially people in this room, including myself, will say, look, this is it's all relative, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, et cetera, et cetera. That may be true. I mean, that there are many psychological and cultural and societal influences on what we imagine to be beautiful, no thanks to, say, Twiggy decades ago or whatever, setting the stage for a certain look and so forth. But truly, symmetry and proportionality, these are things that are fairly universal, and they are true in various cultures. Here you have an advertisement for skin whitening in China. And even though the whiter the skin is sort of the more prized the face, still, look at this face. It's still symmetrical. I mean, there's still a certain proportionality to the features. So certain universal principles apply. Now, we've already covered the first part of this lecture, innate experiences of beauty. We're now going to move on to art. You know, it's actually difficult to think about how you could define art, capital A art, in a universal way that would cover all centuries of art, you know. Number 3, we will enjoy looking at the spectrum of bad art. That bad art is not merely one kind of art. And again, this is my conception of what bad art is. We will move on to something, a recently coined phenomenon known as the Spiegel effect. What I'd like to call the Kunst Schadenfreude. Number 5, we'll move on to research, because without research, what is there really except an opinion? Body dysmorphia and its treatment, and the summary. So, what is art? I won't tell you let me tell you what it is. Okay. I mean, let's just be honest. Art is embodied meaning. Art is embodied meaning. And I wish I could take credit for this, but I give credit where it's due, and that would be with Arthur Danto, who is the late, great critic and art philosopher, who, one of his latest books, his later books, What Art is an excellent little volume that I recommend, although I don't have it on the back table. And Arthur Danto, and there he is with Marina Abramovic at her performance piece titled The Artist is Present, which she performed at the Museum of Modern Art in New York a few years ago. He said that art is embodied meaning because he wanted to find something that was universal about art, something that would mean as much post Marcel Duchamp and his fountain, which I have an image of, and where basically beauty died. But he would also want art that, a definition that covered Titian and Michelangelo and everyone else. And so art has embodied meaning. In other words, art is not merely a pretty picture. Art has some depth and intention and moves you and has some feeling, and there's all of these things that can occur with art. It's not merely beauty, because beauty itself is not merely art, is not art by being beautiful, and certainly something that is not beautiful is not necessarily not art. Now, Arthur Danto got tired when he was within the artwork itself of Marina Abramovic. Marina sat in a chair all day, every day for 4 months at MoMA, facing an empty chair, but a chair that was to be filled by any volunteer if they were lucky enough to be, first in line, because there was often a long line to sit with Marina Abramovic, and you could stay there as long as you want and look at her. As you looked at each other, you were creating art silently. And it was an extremely moving piece where people were in tears, and you could stay there as long as you want. Some people stayed all day, other people were there for 5 minutes. Well, Arthur got tired, so he was replaced by this gentleman. I regret having to show a picture of myself after the comment that one of the speakers made this week, where it seems that all the speakers have to include an image of themselves for some reason. And then I thought about how much I am like Bob Fosse. Well, in certain ways, at least. Anyway, let's just move on. But anyway, so Brillo. I mean, this is art. This is art. This is Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol has this. He appropriates some banal, advertising. And this is art. There's some meaning behind this intention, even if it doesn't look like it took him much effort to create. Now, you can even take it, I mean, this is what's amazing about art. Here you have, is this Warhol? No, this is Mike Bidlow. Mike Bidlow, who created this in 2007, this is titled Not Warhol, 1964. And so you have now twice removed from the original object, and I think I get excited by this because there's something very exciting about this, and of course it's a reflection of our times and so forth. And but you have this, you have The Death of Socrates by Jacques-Louis David, and this is not merely a beautiful picture. This is the moment before Socrates takes the hemlock, and it engenders feelings in us. Here we have a different kind of art, a photograph by Alfred Stieglitz, of his beloved Georgia O'Keeffe. And, you know, sometimes we denigrate photography, and here we have these fingers that seem to be doing something, and this stare that's inward, and we have, of course, a Picasso. But ask yourselves privately, if you only saw this image and you knew nothing of Picasso, what would you think? You know, if you only had this image to work with and not the context or the frame, what would go through your mind and about how you would value this particular work of art, this one out of a ton of works that he has done? But if you only had access to one and had no context. Here we have an artwork by James Turrell, which is a participatory work at LACMA in Los Angeles. And here is a huge room with suffused with this incredible blue light. And you have to don hospital shoe covers to go in here, and it's this amazing experience. You really feel like Mike TV from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where you're just you're in the art itself. And of course, here is the fountain by Marcel Duchamp, who merely placed a urinal in a different frame, calling this art, and it really changed the world. Now, let's go over the spectrum. The spectrum of bad art. There's quite a bit spectrum here. I want to show you just a few-minute clip from Portlandia. Take a look at this.
Bad art, good walls. We provide art to coffee shops only. Oh yes, it is very bad, I assure you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Gigi?
Yeah, Phil?
Got an order from a new coffee shop opening up on Hawthorne.
Great.
So they got about 500 square feet of space, and needs those walls filled with some bad art. So let's see what we got.
Let's do it.
How about this?
It's horrible. I love it.
Right? Really boring. Can't even tell which side it goes on.
A blurry dog?
That's pretty bad. Composition's no good. I would say throw it on.
All right. Appreciate your honesty, always.
I have something.
What?
You know, that's like student photography.
That's horrible.
Black man sitting, looking.
Yeah, but I want it in black and white. Oh.
There's the one. Although we could do a double.
Yeah. Brothers, twins. Okay. I love this.
Yeah. Construction. I mean, that says.
Construction.
I was just thinking that exact same word. I was saying it too at the same time. Why don't we go crazy and have some forlorn, red-headed women? I think she's quite sad.
Is she inside or outside?
She's both. So it's nighttime and they built a doorway.
Great. We should check with Sean. He just came back from an art fair.
Hey, Sean. Yep. We got a new coffee shop opening up.
Oh, great. Yeah, I heard the whole thing. I heard you guys talking. Great. You need some help?
Yeah. Mind coming over?
Sure. You guys got a lot of bad stuff there, but you know what would make it worse?
Huh.
Music. Some good music.
This one's pretty bad. What is that, a guitar?
And that sound's coming from the sun.
Oh, so not from the guitar?
Nope. Let me think of what's in my stash. Hold on 1 second. What about this one, guys?
What is that?
Well, it's a really bad painting of a man, but his head is a mummy.
Like humor in paintings. That's awful.
Yes or
That's,
no?
Yes.
Yes.
That's many levels of bad. If this is the bathroom, where's the bathroom? Espresso machine.
Front door.
Back wall.
All right. It's great. You get the idea. I can't keep going with that, but hold on just a moment here. Okay, here we go. Anyway, I don't know how to make it big again. I'm sorry. So anyway, can you help me with this? Thank you. within the, I don't know how to get back there. There's a very close.
Yeah. If you go back to your drive.
Okay,
you can
all
open
right,
it.
all right. Okay. All right, that's good. Thank you. Okay, there is I'm going to move right along here. There is actually a place called the Museum of Bad Art. It is in Boston, in areas around Boston. Here we have an image from the Museum of Bad Art. This is Lucy in the Field with Flowers. Okay. Now, I felt that this reminded me of something. God, you know, it reminded me of Napoleon Dynamite, if you've seen that cult film. And it was interesting because I got a chance to look at these artworks that were intended to be good but failed somehow, okay? And they were collected. And there were some rules at the museum. They would not accept works that were on velvet. They would not accept works that were by children or, and there were some other rules, but basically, if you found this at a yard sale or something, that would be appropriate. So you have her sort of floating in these fields, and then you have Chiquita, kind of two-dimensional. You have this work, which the wall text at the Museum of Bad Art stated was like a cross between Simba from The Lion King and the singer Michael Bolton. And you can't tell, but there's a kind of, the paint was put on really thickly under the nose, so it looked like whipped cream. So they commented on that. Then you have this woman wearing, I thought it was an abstracted Islanders jersey, and she's wearing a stethoscope. I don't know. And of course you have this. So that's one end of the spectrum. Now you have another, then I thought about, well, I saw this, this exhibit at the Neue Gallery in New York, Degenerate Art, and this was a term that the Nazis used to denigrate modern art that they did not like. And so this is what they did like. This was actually over Hitler's mantle at the Führerbau. And this is by Adolf Ziegler. This is titled The Four Elements, Fire, Water, Earth, and Air. And as you can see, there's an attempt at something classical and serious and austere. But honestly, it sort of just strikes as kind of forced and empty, and doesn't really generate much in the way of feeling. Whereas you have this in contrast. You have this Max Beckmann's expressionist work. Here you have a work, a triptych also, but it's entirely different. You have feeling and a story. You have the human story that's depicted here. You have angst. You have alienation. These are experiences that are counter to the fascist ideals. And so they were put in contrast to each other at the gallery. And it was really a remarkably moving exhibit. And you have, examples of works that the Nazis thought were bad, that they thought were so bad that they needed to be eliminated. In fact, the empty frames are works that had been destroyed by them. Then there's this intermediate area of folk art, and there's actually a museum, there are many museums of folk art, and it's sort of this middle ground. Here you have a Henry Darger work. You have the work of Henry Darger, who was not formally trained artist. He was considered an outsider. You've heard of outsider art. And this man was pigeons can discriminate between good and bad art. And so they were trained on works of art by Japanese school children. Japanese school children, some of them shamed into, but shamed because of their bad art. In fact, they needed a kind of, they basically had parents, teachers evaluate the children's art. And those that received an A mark were considered good. Those with lesser marks were considered bad. And what they did was they trained the pigeons to peck vigorously on the works of good art and to not peck on the bad art. And it turns out that the pigeons were able to discriminate quite well. However, then if you obscured the work so they can only see part of the image, they were still able to discriminate. However, if you turn the image into sort of this black and white thing, or if you pixelated the image, the pigeons were unable to discriminate. But it's still it's an amazingly remarkable thing. Now, another kind of research was this project. You have here the work of Banksy. Banksy is this kind of elusive British spray paint artist, and this work itself sold for something like 70,000 pounds, which is like 100,000 something US dollars. Here's the experiment. I'm just going to show you a couple minutes of this and flip through this. Basically what this was is this. Banksy had all of his works, or a number of his works, sold alongside all these other works that you see out on like Fifth Avenue, outside the Met or something in New York, where it's, the value typically is not tremendous, but he had them sold even though each and every one of these works was worth tens of thousands of dollars, potentially. Look what happens. No one is buying, in other words. I'm going to flip through this. It's like the Maytag repairman. He's just sitting there. These works are worth so much money. He's having a falafel. I just want to show you someone like buying them. Oh, man. You get the idea here. Okay, someone buys them. He basically all day, he just wants something to decorate his walls. He's like, this'll do. Okay. The total earnings for the day was just over $400. Okay. So, God, I mean, talk about needing a frame for your works of art. Is the frame everything? Is that the value? Because if you were there saying this is a Banksy, well, then it would be a different story. One final research project was this. Hold on a second. Mere exposure. Well, couldn't it just be that merely by being exposed to something that automatically increases its value? Well, there had been some research that seemed to point in that direction, but there were these other researchers recently, Meskin and his friends, they decided to do this. What he did was he had people become quite familiar with the works of Thomas Kincaid, America's painter of light. And you're laughing because of some reason there. Thomas Kincaid, I mean, you use your own judgment about Thomas Kincaid. I don't find him that bad, but it does look like someone, ate some like Fruity Pebbles and threw it up. But and then you have a British painter, Thomas Millais. Ophelia, Kincaid. And they thought, okay, well, what we're going to do is expose these people to a lot of this art and then reassess them over time. And they thought, okay, well, if the mere exposure effect were real, then people would like the Kincaid more and more, and so forth. It turns out that value was stable here through this project. In fact, the people disliked the Kincaid more over time. So they liked it even less than they had before. So the mere exposure effect failed to increase the value of the Kincaid. This is by my friend Alexander Melamede and Komar, his former art partner. This is called America's Most Wanted. They wanted to find out, what do people want in an artwork? This artwork, the information was commissioned by them. They used a research company and a survey company, and they came up with this. You have this historical figure in a natural background with this family on vacation and some wildlife thrown in. This is what America wants. This is the best painting, America's Most Wanted. This is America's Least Wanted. Some abstraction with triangles. Least Wanted. Now, that's not a very nice segue into body dysmorphia, but nevertheless, the cane, I do not want to be... I don't want to keep you. So let's just briefly talk about this. These are some images of models in Barcelona by a Barcelona artist, Natalia Pereira. This is called Dysmorphobina. Basically, the commentary on how we need to focus on our appearance in this obsessive way in order to function in our world today. These are models that merely have an elastic band wrapped around their heads, and look how disfigured they look. BDD, bodies of dysmorphia, is a preoccupation with an imagined defect of appearance. Even if there's slightly something abnormal, the concern for it is absolutely overwhelming and excessive. It impairs functioning, and this is not an eating disorder or something else. Okay. The remarkable thing about body dysmorphic disorder is that you would think that there are abnormalities in the brain functioning when it comes to self-assessment, but this study shows that it's generalizable, that if you assess images that have nothing to do with your face or your body, the same things still happen neurologically. Here you have the image of a house, but then these filters placed on it. Here you require a kind of gestalt appreciation of this image in order to recognize this as a house. Here, if you're a detailed-oriented viewer, you have much easier time determining that this is a house. And it turns out that, absolutely true, the people with body dysmorphic disorder have such an easier time determining that that's a house when you have the high spatial frequency image that I showed you before, the highly detailed image. And in fact, the parts of their brain in the prefrontal cortex become hyperactivated compared to sort of a control group, whereas the visual association areas are not as active as a control group when they are looking at the more gestalt picture. So they really have a hard time with the Gestalt. They're so focused on that little pimple that nobody can see instead of how gorgeous that they actually are, this idea. Now, how do you treat this? Well, one conventional way of treating this is a kind of CBT-like treatment where you are changing the general thinking pattern of the individual. You know, my sister had a nose job, gets a lot of compliments. Well, therefore, that must apply to me, and that's going to be true for me. That's an error. That's a cognitive error, and there are different types of cognitive errors, this kind of therapy helps to set that straight and help these patients. Well, what I'm suggesting here is that you do this. Number one, by you yourself as a clinician appreciating how value, particularly when we're looking at art, is a relative phenomenon, even if there is a biological basis for some of this. How we put a frame on something, how something becomes valued by its context, its pretext, its cultural, being culturally bound. All of these things, your own prejudices, by you yourself as a clinician considering these things, this alone, number one, this alone will help in your management and treatment in psychotherapy and otherwise with body dysmorphic patients. Now, number two is that you now take that understanding and your consideration of value in art, of bad art, of art generally, in the way that we've discussed it today, and you share this with them. You treat them like, of course you do, treat them as if they are walking around intelligent beings and not merely patients, that you share what we talked about today with them. And finally, number three is that you then employ actual works of art in your therapy with them, and you have them seek out an image that resonates with them, because art itself, works of art themselves that have been created by others, have functions. They have, to my view, 6 functions, one function being a kind of permeability function, where you get these people out of the mirror and you expand and you add dimensions to your therapy by employing art and having them work out this issue through something beautiful or maybe not beautiful. And so, therefore, I suggest that each and every one of you at least consider owning art healing. I know it's an advertisement, but you know, I have these books in the back. I've markedly reduced them for this audience because honestly, I mean, I'd give it away for free, but I hope to go to 10,000 Waves one more time before I leave. So, thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it.